Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the Fire Suppression Systems Association's Horizon webinar series. Your lines are muted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Attendees can also use the chat, but our presenters will not be regularly checking it, so if you do have a question, make sure to use that Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the FSSA YouTube channel for viewing. I will now hand it off to Erica to further introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Becca. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the very first FSSA HERizon webinar. I'm incredibly excited to moderate today's session featuring Rekha Agrawal, CEO of KiddeFenwal. Rekha has built an impressive career spanning more than 2 decades. In today's conversation, Rekha will share the lessons and defining moments that shaped her journey to the C-suite. Later in the webinar, we'll open the floor for a live question and answer segment. So please, we encourage you to participate. We'd love to make this session as interactive as possible. With that being said, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Rekha to begin today's discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erica, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm really excited about spending this next hour with our audience. So what I thought I would do today is just spend a little bit of time talking to you about my personal career jungle gym and some of the lessons and things that I've learned as I've gone through my jungle gym. I thought I'd spend sort of maybe the first roughly half hour of this conversation doing that. And then happy to take questions on pretty much anything that anybody wants to talk about. And we can go from there, but really excited to hear about others' input as we go through this as well. So what you can see on the screen is my depiction of my career jungle gym, and I think it's important to think about careers not as a ladder, because I haven't found that they're always necessarily linear, but as a jungle gym, and there are steps along the way sometimes that may not seem very linear, and I'll talk to you about some of those from my personal experience. That contribute overall to a long career. So let me start by talking to you about the beginning of my career. So the red line there on that chart represents my first company I started my career with, which was General Electric. I spent a lot of time in school and being very technical and getting a lot of technical credentials. So I have a background in engineering. I also have a formal background in statistics. And so I started my career at General Electric, being sort of this technical person, and that's really what they hired me for. And I spent almost 8 years at General Electric, and it was a fantastic experience. Really, really great company to work for at the time. Great training, great exposure to a lot of things. And so I learned a ton while I was there. A couple of things that I would say that I took away from that. One is, especially early on in your career, I think it's really good to be deep in your space. Spend a lot of time just really absorbing everything, and be deep. Be deep in what you're doing. Um, a theme of my career has been to work for great bosses. Um, I've had the pleasure of just working for a ton of great bosses, and what I find is that when you're around great bosses, you learn a ton. And so there's always a lot of discussion about mentoring and all that sort of thing, and I think all of that's great. But I also think that working for great bosses is a terrific way of just learning a ton. And so I've had the opportunity to get that, and I've also sought that out where I've had choices. I've sought out working for great bosses. The other thing that I would say about my early career at General Electric was I had a great opportunity to just be global. So I had opportunities early on, very early in my career, where I would just work on a project that was in Europe or that was in Asia, and I would just go and try to figure it out. And what I would say about that is that if having global exposure is something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to try to do that as soon as you can, as early as you can in your career. Because what I've found over the course of my career is that those early experiences in being in a different culture and getting to know people around the world, those all resonated differently than they did later in my career. And so I would say that early part of your career, if that's something you're interested in, try to get those opportunities, try to go because you just learn a ton from doing that. Um, and so the thing about that really happened to me early in my career, that early time that I was at General Electric, was that I figured out that I wasn't actually doing what I wanted to be doing. And that was a huge surprise to me. Um, I actually found in my career at GE fairly early on that I wanted to run a business. And that was not something that I ever knew. It wasn't something that I thought about when I was at school. It wasn't something that I knew appealed to me until I was really exposed to that opportunity at GE, until I saw business leaders and how they ran things. And again, great bosses. I early in my career, I was in the room with amazing business leaders, people like Dave Coady and that sort of thing. And it really excited me. And I thought, wow, that's something I want to do one day. And like I said, it was news. I didn't know that. And so one of the things that I did that's kind of a theme underlying my career that you'll see is that I tried to move towards that. I tried to figure out how could I put myself in a position where eventually I could be running a business. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do because what it means as somebody who was very technical and who was in rooms because of my technical expertise, it meant I had to take some job changes, some leaps on doing some different things that moved me away from being technical and towards other things like closer to business operations, that sort of thing. And that can be risky, right? Especially after you've spent so much time becoming a technical expert, there can be risk in working away from that. But knowing that that was something that I wanted to do, I took those kinds of risks. And you'll see also that risk taking in a career is something that I'll touch on more than once. But that was something that I did towards working my way towards that goal. And that was my time at GE. I should mention also the most important thing that happened to me at General Electric, which was that I met my husband. And as somebody who spent a lot of time at work, that's maybe not surprising that that's where I met him. And that has obviously been something that I've kept with me throughout my entire career since then. I left General Electric and I came to Tyco. And Tyco, at the time, I started my career at Tyco at their corporate office. And it was a really exciting place to be. And again, left General Electric for a great boss at Tyco, Narain. And it was just an exciting place to be. It was a very exciting time in the history of the company. Ed Breen had started about a year earlier. There had been a scandal, and there were some great people who were coming to the company as a result of Ed being there. And I got a terrific opportunity to start my career at Tyco Corporate, and again, working for great bosses. Um, I spent about 2 years at Tyco Corporate working in operational excellence. And then 2 years into my career there was this big announcement that Tyco was splitting itself into three public companies. And at the time, it was the biggest corporate split that had ever happened. So this $40 billion company was splitting into three separate public companies. Um, And it did a couple of things. One is it immediately eliminated the job I did have. But the second thing it did was it created this opportunity for me to be part of the team that was going to be executing this public company split. So that was a really exciting opportunity. A number of people asked me about my interest in it. It was something I didn't really know anything about. It had to do a lot with various public company processes, treasury, cash, all sorts of things that I didn't really know a lot about. But I did know a lot about project planning and managing complexity and all that sort of thing. And so that was fun. Um, One thing that was clear about that role that I took on that team was that by definition, we were going to be working ourselves out of a job. So when I signed up to do that job, I knew that assuming that we were successful in what we were doing, that job was going to last a year at most. Um, and so I signed up for it knowing that I was working my way out of a job. And again, that gets to sort of this idea of risk taking and not being afraid if there's some really unique opportunities, things that you'll get exposed to in ways that you won't always get that opportunity, not being afraid to sign up for those. Um, Again, worked for a great boss in that role. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about that, which is that, sort of stayed in touch with him. One thing about great bosses that I think is really important is once you get them, stay in touch with them because you never know what great things you might continue to learn from them even after they're a boss of yours. This particular one, Bob, got in touch with me not that long ago and said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know, really proud of what you've done and just really enjoyed working with you." And so it was awesome. We got to reconnect. He came over, had dinner with me and my husband, and it was awesome. And so I say that because I think that it's really important when you spend a lot of time at work building relationships. I personally spend a lot of time making sure I don't lose touch with those people because if I thought they were awesome before, then I continue to think that they're awesome. All right, after I left that role, I kept telling people I wanted to run something. And I kept having this conversation, and it was a little bit recurring where I would tell people I wanted to run something, and they would say, "Well, we're not going to let you really run something because you haven't run something." And that felt a little bit frustrating. And so finally, coming out of this role that I'd worked on with Tyco splitting up, I got the opportunity to run a branch at ADT Security. And so finally, somebody was going to let me run something. And what I'd say about that is I was excited about the opportunity for somebody to let me run something. It didn't necessarily come with a bow around it, right? So I was going from this place where I was working with the C-suite team and I was hanging around with all sorts of important people and SVPs in the ivory tower. And I was going from that to being one of 100 plus branch managers, sort of 8 levels down in the organization, all that sort of thing. And so I had to kind of think about that and think about that change and, whether that was the leap that I wanted to take. But it was the leap that somebody was going to offer me to actually go run something. And so I did. And so I went and ran a branch of ADT Security in Pennsauken, New Jersey. I showed up that first day, and people there were the people in the branch. They were selling and installing commercial and residential security systems. And the first day I walked in, I think a few of them looked at me and they're like, "Wait, who are you and what are you doing here again?" Um, but it was amazing. It was just a fantastic opportunity for me. I got to learn a ton. I met some phenomenal people. Um, and I got to really run something. And so one thing I would say about when you take roles like that, roles where you haven't necessarily done everything in your past that lead you to that role, lean into what you know and then learn as quickly as you can on things you don't. right? So for me in that role, it was I didn't know how to install a commercial security system, but what I did know is business process, inventory management, those kinds of things. And so, I spent my early part of my time there impacting the things that I knew about and could impact quickly, giving myself time to learn some of the other things um, that I got to learn over time. So that was amazing. And it was really a key point in my career that allowed me to then build on running larger and larger businesses, larger and larger operations, all that sort of thing. And so that move, while I'm showing it here as kind of a step down on the jungle gym, it was a really important one because it's what allowed me to then do a number of different things after that. The other thing I would say about that role in particular was, when you're in roles where you're learning and that sort of thing, also don't feel afraid to share your perspective on things because it will be different. So, as an example, one of the people at the branch at ADT was the guy who led commercial installation for me. So he ran a bunch of the technicians and all that sort of thing. And he was curious, he was smart, and he was somebody that I spent time. He asked me a lot of questions about things that I knew about, thinking about just my experiences, how to read a P&L, how to do things that he hadn't been exposed to. Um, and so while I was learning about commercial installation from him, I was able to share some things with him that he hadn't had exposure to in the past, and that was fun. Um, did a number of things at ADT, again, under the theme of being able to build on that experience that I had now of leading some things. And then I had the opportunity to move to Simplex Grinnell. So that's the green line on my jungle gym. So that was really different business. Now we're doing mostly commercial installation of fire alarms and servicing. And that was a really operationally intense business. Ton of fun. It's like every day, every day, every day, every day, it mattered who was where, what you were doing, how effectively you were doing it, all the people that you had that were doing it, all that sort of thing. And that was a phenomenal experience for me because I got to really learn about driving discipline through an organization, how you think about that, how you create cadence, and all of those things are super important as you're leading businesses. And so that was really fun for me. Um, One thing that I'd say about that role is there was a lot of people development in that role. It was how do I build the team that I know I need? And a large part of that was trying to create an environment where people were going to be successful. So, one of the big early hires that I did in that role was having a district leader for me come and take on a different district that really needed new leadership and support and guidance. Um, and Charlie, agreed to take that risk on. And leave a situation where he was pretty comfortable and doing really well, but sort of took on a risk of something that was a little bit more thorny, um, and that was going to really be able to demonstrate for him kind of the type of leader he was. And so having somebody to take that on, creating an environment where somebody wants to take something on like that, was really awesome, and he made a huge impact, and hopefully he still looks back on that and thinks that was a really good move for him in his career. I then moved to Tyco, what at the time was called Tyco Fire Suppression Products. So that's the yellow line. So now couple of things that were different about that role. A few things. Now I'm going from the install and service side of the business to the product side. So needs different muscles, more strategic in some ways. You're making decisions today that are going to impact the future of the business years from now. Also was a global business. So the fact that I'd had global experience in my past was really helpful towards thinking through that kind of thing. Um, and really just an exciting move. I was so happy to be in that role. And I'll tell you a story, when we talk about, again, risks and just difficult things that you can gravitate towards. My boss, Colleen, again, amazing boss, when she offered me the role. So when she offered me the role, not even like I hadn't even started yet. In that first conversation with when she offered me the role, she said to me, she said, "Hey, by the way, part of the scope of this role is a business that's really challenging." She told me the background of that business, and it was an acquisition. And she's like, "It's really challenging, and I need you to go in and solve it and come back to me and tell me how we're gonna get through this and what your recommendation is on solving it." So that was kind of call to action. And it was just a really interesting experience for me to do that. It was a business that was far away. It was a global business. It was based in multiple time zones away. It was complicated. And kind of how we ended up where we were was tricky. And so I spent a lot of time getting data, really trying to understand, spending time over there, understanding, getting people's perspectives on the history of where we got to, why we were there, all that kind of thing. And also spent some time with experts. And in this case, that meant lawyers and some others who had some unique perspectives on the situation. And I spent a number of months doing that. And then I went back to her and I said, "Okay, here's what I think we need to do." And my recommendation was a really challenging one for her. It meant that she was going to personally have to deal with some difficult situations. And I give her a ton of credit. She took them on. She said, "Yep, I believe you." And she did it. And it was tough, but it was the right thing. And we got through it. And it had a great impact on the business. And it just demonstrated that we could deal with tough situations, and that was formative for me in terms of my time in that role. I left Tyco slash Johnson Controls after a number of years there. Really enjoyed it. Spent a long time really absorbing the industry. Um, But I left there to go do something I really hadn't anticipated at all. Um, and I'll tell you the story about that. So again, around great bosses and just people, great leaders who you gravitate to. There was somebody in my ecosystem. His name was Johan. I was never working for him directly, but he was somebody who was a leader at Tyco when I was there, and I was just thought he was amazing. And so he left Tyco, and I just kept in touch with him. And one day he called me and he said, "Hey, I want you to come work with me." And he was doing something very different. He was at Morgan Stanley. He was working for a private fund there. And he wanted me to come being an operating partner. And initially I was like, "Wait, what do you want me to do?" And he spent time with me, explained to me why he thought it would be compelling and what he thought I could learn from it, all that sort of thing. And mostly, again, it was, I knew he'd be a great person to work with and for. And so I took that leap. And that was amazing because I got to learn a ton of things that I didn't know. First of all, I got to learn a ton about private equity. I got to learn about a lot of different business models that I didn't know anything about. I ended up, in the course of that time, being an acting chief operating officer for a healthcare company. Never done healthcare before until I got to Morgan Stanley. And so just a tremendously steep part of the learning curve, super fun. And like I said, had an amazing experience working with Johan and really enjoyed that opportunity. The other thing it did is it really positioned me well when I got a phone call about KiddeFenwal. It really positioned me well to really understand what an amazing opportunity KiddeFenwal was, because I'd been in private equity. I'd been in this industry, and so I just had a really unique lens on understanding just what a great opportunity KiddeFenwal was. So that's where I am here. You'll notice that on my career jungle gym, there's not a line for KiddeFenwal yet because I sort of feel like it's only in hindsight that you can really draw kind of how the lines on your career jungle gym go. Um, but the one that, the way that I think about my time at KiddeFenwal, it's been amazing. I honestly feel like everything that I've done up until my career has gotten me ready for this. It's been tremendous. Um, and what I'm hoping is that in my organization today, we have employees that have been, who are like third generation employees, who've older generation and the generation before them worked with us. And what I'm hoping is that we're building an environment where future generations, there can be 6 generations of future KiddeFenwal people in our group. That's how I think about my tenure here. Last story I'll share with you before we open it up to questions is that when they announced me as the CEO of KiddeFenwal in the future, they did it as an internal organization, so just to people in the organization on a Friday afternoon. And on the Saturday morning, I woke up and I had a message from a former customer of mine, many time zones away, who is now a customer of KiddeFenwal, who said, "Hey, here you're coming back to the industry." And the reason that I tell you that story is because what you realize over time is that as you're building these points in your career jungle gym, you come across a lot of people and you make a lot of impressions. And that's really what's setting the foundation for your reputation. And you may not always know today who that's going to be tomorrow, that you're going to come back into contact with and that sort of thing. And it just means be thoughtful about what you're putting out there because it really is a tremendously small world, and that's certainly something that I feel like I've learned and proven to myself over and over again over the course of my career jungle gym. All right, Erica, I'm going to pause there.
Thank you so much, Rekha. I mean, what a cool story, start to finish. I have a few questions. There's some questions in the chat. I think two of the themes that stuck out to me are good bosses and mentorship, and also risk taking, right? And wanting to get to here takes a high level of risk um, and endurance to get where you're at, right? And so I think one question for me is, how do you go, or how do you keep going when the risk becomes very intense?
Well, so let me unpack that a little bit, Erica. One of the things I would say is, when you're thinking about a new role, I always try to think about it in two separate ways. One is what can you bring to the role? And two is what can you learn from the role? And so when I talk about taking risks, what I mean by that is lean into things that maybe you don't know. And you've seen examples for me where I've done that. But what I wouldn't say is don't go into a situation where you don't think you can bring any added value, because that's not necessarily the right balance. Always be cognizant of what you can bring to the role and how that's going to help the role as well as helping you. There's got to be that right balance. When I say risk taking, I don't mean be reckless, but I do mean understand where that balance is for you and sometimes be on the uncomfortable side of that balance, but don't be reckless and make sure that you're clear on what you can add so that you can, as you go into a new role and as you're in that steep part of the learning curve, that you can lean on bringing some things that you have in your experience to add value to the team and to that role as well.
So, what message would you leave some of the women here that might be hesitant to pursue leadership because maybe they don't feel ready?
I think that gets back to the risk taking. Ready is always in the eyes of the perceivers, right? And look, people don't get to big roles without taking some risks. And so you personally have to be comfortable with where you are on that scale and where you balance. But I would say that if you think about the role you're potentially contemplating, everybody who could go into that role is going to need some level of learning, is going to need some level of doing something that they haven't done before. And the question is, it should it be you?
Yeah. And so, I mean, that could go into, having good bosses. Um, and sometimes, you might not always be blessed with a good boss, right? And I know for me, I've had many, come out of the woodworks and blessed in that way. But if you can't find them or don't have them, um, did you have mentors outside of good bosses, and how did they impact your career journey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's what I would say about that, which is I didn't always have a situation where, and I find this can be sometimes a little trite in organizations where, there can be formal mentoring programs and that sort of thing. And I haven't always had that. And by the way, I'm not always sure I'm a huge believer in that either. But what I have had and what I do very proactively is try to cultivate great people around me. And so you heard that about some of my stories, which is that when I see good leadership, I just try to gravitate towards it. And so I try, and oftentimes it doesn't have to be, hey, will you be my mentor? It doesn't have to be that. It will be, hey, will you have a coffee with me? Or, hey, can I just set up half an hour and I'd love to get your perspective on X, Y, or Z, or anything like that. And in general, my experience has been people are quite generous when you do that. Don't waste their time, but people are quite generous when you do that. And oftentimes it can just be that. It can be people who, at a given time when you're looking for some input or you could use somebody to bounce something off of, so reach out to those people around you who are great and just ask for that. And like I said, most of the time, my experience has been that people will be happy to do that.
Definitely. We have quite a few questions that have popped into our chat. One is, what was the most difficult pivot you had to make, and how did you manage to overcome it?
I think likely the most difficult pivot that I had to make was that one that I talked to you about going to work at the ADT security branch. And how I overcame it, I think I talked a little bit about that. It's leaning into what you bring and what you know, and it's learning as fast as you can about the stuff that you don't. And the way for me to do the learning is to just be out there, be around the people who are doing it. I used to, when I was at the ADT branch, I used to go in trucks with guys and follow them, drive around with them and go to their jobs and see what they did and how their job was and what was annoying them and getting on their nerves and what were things that I could help fix as the branch leader. Um, and that's, how I've always found to do the learning is go talk to people, go learn from the experts, and then also spend time with customers. That is a key way to do learning, is really hear from the people who are buying your stuff, what's going well, what's not going well, and what can you do to make an impact on that.
Awesome. Another question, as the industry evolves, what is one skill or core competency you believe the next generation of professional needs to master?
Erica, that's a really good question, and here's how I think about it, which is that what everybody needs to master is the skill to learn, right? So today, whether it's AI or all sorts of things that are happening in the world, it's moving fast. Technology moves fast, the industry is moving fast, everything moves quickly. And what I would say is that the biggest skill is learn how to learn, lean into that learning, and make sure that you're exposed to the things that could cause big differences in the way we do things today versus the way we're going to do that in the future. And what I would say too is that our industry tends to not do that as much as some other industries. So I don't know that people always feel like they need to, but I think you do. And every industry is going to evolve, including ours, even though ours might not be on the sort of front edge of that. Every industry is going to evolve. And so the more of us that can lean into figuring out how and where and what that's going to look like for us, the more we're going to be able to shape what that looks like, because there's going to be a ton of challenges. I mean, I think about things for our industry associated with where are we going to find the next generation of people who want to do the things that are needed in this industry and who are going to do the installations and the services and all that sort of thing. Things are going to change and evolve, and we've got to figure out how to make that work for us in the future. And so that's how I think about that.
Definitely. Another, how do you balance long-term career ambition with being present and avoiding burnout in demanding roles?
Um, Good question. So I think that a couple of things that I would say about that. One is if you're doing things that are energizing for you, then that really helps. And so one of the things that you heard about my career was sort of this theme around wanting to do something different and taking risks to do that. So I think a big thing is, are you really excited about what you come in to do every day? Because if you do, if you're excited about what you're doing and if you're learning and growing in what you're doing, I think that helps significantly from a burnout perspective. The other thing I'd say is you're the only person who can figure out you and what you need, right? So the job is one thing, and then life is something else. And, and so you've got to figure out what you want from your job and what that means in terms of your personal situation, whether it's travel or hours or whatever. But it's got to work for your life too. And you're the only person who can figure out what that means, how you balance that, how you put all that together. Um, but you've got to make it work for you. And it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I think it's really important to keep those things in mind.
Definitely, definitely. If you could go back and give your 30-year-old self, he doesn't know you're 30. No. Give your 30-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Um, if I could go back and give my younger self one piece of advice, I think the advice would be the following. It would be enjoy the journey. One one thing I would say is that anybody who knows me knows that I'm not known for my patience, right? And so part of what has motivated me over the course of my career has been a little bit of this impatience of how can I learn the next thing and what can I do in my next thing and that sort of thing. And some of that is what motivates you, right? So I wouldn't say necessarily to be less impatient, but what I would say is enjoy the journey, recognize that it's all learning, it's all great, it's all positioning for something, and just enjoy it.
Definitely. Let's see. Did you ever feel pressure to lead differently as a woman? And how did you navigate that?
Do I ever feel pressured to lead differently? So here's what I would say about that. I think that early in my career, I especially early on. So in general, in my career, I've mostly been around, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of men, all that sort of thing. And what I would say is early in my career, I probably felt like it was important to show up with credibility, right? Like it was important to show up and have people take me seriously. And so I probably did early on make sure that I was showing up sort of put together, that I had the right clothes on, some of those kinds of things. And I'll tell you the story, Erica, that I got to a certain part in my career, and actually it was Colleen, one of my bosses that I mentioned earlier. And she said to me, she said, actually, you need to have more personal disclosure. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. She said, she said, people want to know more about you, like the real you, the personal you. And it was a bit of it was a bit of a revelation because I'd spent sort of a bunch of my career wanting to show up and sort of be professional and show up and have people take me
Yeah,
seriously. And then somebody was telling me that, oh yeah, no, you're at a point in your career where people take you seriously. That's not what they need to know. What they would need to know is kind of who are you and who is the personal Rekha. Um, and so that was a revelation. And so I spent time working on that. Obviously, I'm here, so hopefully this is a sign of the fact that I'm working on that.
definitely.
But yeah, I think that that was, to me, it was, when I reflected on that advice that she was giving me as a leader, I think it was in thinking about the hindsight of having grown up in a place where those were the kinds of things that sort of informed my early ways of showing up. That makes
Definitely.
sense?
Yep, a lot to balance sometimes, the two. And I think it's important to know that in this male dominated world that we lead and work in, we don't have to lead or be like a man because we're not. And there's something special about what we bring to the table as women also, and to not forget that. So definitely enjoyed that answer. Um, how do you now actively create opportunities for women coming up behind you in this industry?
So for me, it's about creating opportunities as much as I can wherever I can, right? It's and part of that is about, so there's a few things that I'd say, Erica. One is some of that's just about trying to model what I think is possible. Another thing is I think it's super important for as leaders for us to be really just transparent with people about um, what impacts them in their careers and just be open about it, right? So, I've had situations where I pulled I'm thinking of one specifically at Simplex Grinnell where I had this group of high potentials that were giving presentations, right? And this was a group of people across my various districts and all that sort of thing. And they were all sort of the same experience level and all that kind of thing. And there was there was a woman who got up and like one of the first things she said is, "Oh, I'm really nervous and I hope you're okay to listen to me," kind of thing. And immediately kind of made herself smaller. And so I pulled her aside and I said, "Don't do that. Nobody else did that. Why are you doing that?" I've also I had this guy who worked for me once, and he got up on stage in front of 300 people wearing like flip-flops and just not looking credible. And so afterwards, I said to him, I'm like, don't do that. If you're going to show up in an audience of 300 people, then look the part and
Yeah,
wear something that looks appropriate. So there's a lot of different examples. I think to me, the key thing is create an environment where you're being transparent with people because people don't necessarily know what kinds of things they're doing that has a broader impact to people. And when you create an environment, not just me personally, but where my leaders are also being transparent, where we've got this sort of high performing atmosphere where people can give each other feedback without feeling like that's a negative thing, where it's really viewed as the positive thing it is because I'm telling you this because I want to see you do better, then I think that that's what's really important and that's how people grow. And I've been very fortunate. I've had people give that to me in my career and that's how people grow.
Sometimes that feedback is good. And I think like your first statement about the woman giving, the speech and, shrinking herself. I think imposter syndrome for women in a room like that is real, and quelling those nerves can be um, reassuring, but trying to find yourself in that moment, can be a big risk also, right? And rewarding in the end if you keep doing it, even if it's uncomfortable. This question is interesting. It kind of mirrors your journey from technical, um, engineering to like a technician side, but flip flop. This person asks, what advice would you give a female that started as a tech that is trying to polish their brand and image and become more professional? Is it possible to change your brand when you've been with an organization for some time? Or is it impossible to break a mold or opinion you may have started with?
Oh, so that's an interesting question. So I'd say a few things on that one, Erica. One is do the work, right? If you're trying to go somewhere different, you're trying to do something different, do the work to get there. So do the homework if it means going to school, if it means learning something, do the work so that you're prepared to do that. And then be clear with people. One of the things that you heard about my early career, I told a lot of people that I want to go run something, right? Like, tell people, be clear with people, be as descriptive as you can with people so they know how to help you, right? And so they know how to help, and so that they're thinking about if you're somebody that they're advocating for, how can they help you to get to where you want to be? But then, there might be a specific situation where it's not going to happen from here. And if it doesn't, then be prepared. Take that risk to go somewhere else. If somewhere else is going to give you an opportunity that you're not going to get where you are, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And by the way, since we're on this topic, Erica, I just feel like I should put out my very hidden agenda, which I'm not going to make hidden anymore, which is if any of you are interested in coming to KiddeFenwal, give us a call.
There you go. Um, let's see. That was a good one. Yeah, it's hard to change. I know for me, going from sales to an operation or leadership, but knowing, like you said, this is my goal in mind at the end of the day, and keep moving across the bridge to what your vision is for yourself. Hold that as your truth at the end of the day is important. Let's see. What do you wish more people knew about leading at the top as a female?
I don't know if this is a female thing in particular. It's what do I wish more people knew? It's definitely not cut out for everybody. Um, I do think that there's this motto out there where people say it's lonely. That can be true. That can be true. You're not necessarily making everybody happy every day. Steve Jobs said that if that's what you're trying to do, sell ice cream, don't be a leader. Um, so I think and I say all of that not because I'm looking for anybody's sympathy or anything. I'm just saying that it's just not it may not be what everybody wants to do, and that's fine, by the way. And there's plenty of stuff people can do in an organization if it's not something that they're interested in. And I think just be clear. If it's not something you want to sign up for, just be clear because definitely not everybody wants to sign up for it, and that's totally fine.
Definitely. In the middle of your career, what do you think is more important, a good boss or someone who positively mentors you? Middle of the career.
All of the above. I would say whenever possible, just have as many people that you can learn from as possible. So at any point in your career, whether it's early or middle or late or whatever, be around people that you're learning from and seek out environments where that's happening, I would say. Um, Great bosses, the thing about them is they impact your day to day, right? Part of the reason I went to work for Johan is because I knew I'd have great days working with him. And that's always better than the alternative. So I tend to be pretty simplistic about this, gravitate to where things are gonna feel good.
Makes the day go by. Have fun, right? have
Absolutely. Life is
have fun
short.
when you can. Yeah,
Life is
yeah.
short, and we spend a lot of time at work, for sure.
That is true. That is true. And I think we've got, let's see, one last question. As busy as you are in your position, do you have the time to mentor other people?
So again, I feel like I do. I don't necessarily have formal mentees, but I certainly have people who call me and who, will reach out and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z. You know, can we spend some time together?" I had somebody call me the other day just to say, "Hey, wanted to let you know that I've moved on to this role. I'm doing this." And I absolutely, my answer is keep in touch, let me know what I can do to help, all that kind of thing. So I feel like that's important. And I really enjoy it when people who have been on my team in the past or we've come across before, or whatever, keep in touch with me. I told you I spend a lot of time doing that with my former bosses and mentors and all that sort of thing. But I really enjoy it when people who I've come across keep in touch with me and keep me updated on how they're doing.
Awesome. Well, as we come to the top of the hour, the end of this hour and webinar, I mean, I'm so grateful you could come and mentor us and spend time with the FSSA today and Horizon. I know mentorship and continuing education and supporting each other is a big part of what Horizon's here to do. And so I couldn't have asked for a better person to come kick off our webinars with. And if you had any closing remarks for everybody here, we'd love to hear them. And for everybody out there, thank you for your questions and your time today. I'm so grateful everybody could make it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Erica. Thanks to everybody for their questions. Wish you all the best of luck, and and go out there and kill it.
Thank you
Have a
so
great
much.
day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.